Most of us live lives that conform to a certain pattern. We wake up, work, eat, sleep, and repeat over and over again. The big chunk of our time devoted to work may not be particularly satisfying, but it may not be particularly dreadful either. If it puts food on our tables and pays our bills, maybe that's all we can ask for. In a slightly better scenario, we have a little bit extra. And what do we do with it? We consume. I'm Andrew Petiprin, Fellow of Popular Culture at the Word on Fire Institute. Now, created things are not in themselves evil. We need food, and there's no reason it should not be both nutritious and delicious. It's well worth our money to purchase fresh ingredients and take our time preparing it. Sometimes we may use our resources to reward someone else for the hard work of preparing it for us in a restaurant. We need clothes and other basic amenities, and it isn't necessarily a virtue to consume cheap things that are the result of unfair wages and which may have to be replaced quickly anyway. But when we build our lives on a platform of possessions, it simply cannot bear the weight of the love we place upon it. Instead, humans are meant to use things both to stay alive and to enjoy the beauty of God's creation. The great St. Augustine wrote, "Enjoyment, after all, consists in clinging to something lovingly for its own sake, while use consists in referring what has come your way to what your love aims at obtaining, provided, that is, it deserves to be loved." Consumerism, that is, patterning one's life almost religiously around the pursuit of material goods, is simply bad for our souls. Pope Francis tells us in his 2015 encyclical letter Laudato Si, people can easily get caught up in a whirlwind of needless buying and spending. Amid this confusion, postmodern humanity has not yet achieved a new self-awareness capable of offering guidance and direction. And this lack of identity is a source of anxiety. We have too many means and only a few insubstantial ends. Likewise, when in our consumption we disregard the needs of others, or the health of our society or the earth for our individual short-term desires, we all suffer the long-term consequences. The horror and monster movie genres often aim at presenting harsh critiques of our hyper-individualized, consumerist, technocratic world in the guise of outlandish characters and plots. Too easily dismissed for their fantastical content, scary movies sometimes are able to force us to look more closely at reality by disguising it with makeup and special effects. In this video, we will explore profound critiques of consumerism in three classic, if somewhat campy, sci-fi horror films. George Romero's seminal 1978 zombie film, Dawn of the Dead. John Carpenter's wild 1988 film about subliminal alien infiltration, They Live. And finally, Jim Jarmusch's ethically offbeat vampire movie from 2013, Only Lovers Left Alive. If you're used to the many films and TV shows that owe their existence to Dawn of the Dead, and especially AMC's popular series The Walking Dead, George Romero's zombie classic may seem tame and cheesy. Years earlier, Romero had made his first and still most famous zombie film, Night of the Living Dead, which deals with various important issues, including race relations in America. But in Dawn of the Dead, the zombie comes to represent what it often still does in the work of Romero's many successors, the mindless consumer. Dawn of the Dead begins as the world appears to be coming to an end as we know it. Every city and town is being overrun by flesh-eating monsters, humans who have died and come back as soulless versions of their former selves. No rational, active will, but rather pure appetite, hell-bent on devouring. They move slowly, but they are relentless. 4 people, Francine, Stephen, Peter, and Roger, escape in a stolen helicopter from the roof of a Philadelphia news station. They finally make it across the state to Pittsburgh, where they land on the roof of a mall. They go inside and find the place full of zombies, and Francine wonders, what are they doing? Why did they come here? Stephen replies, some kind of instinct, memory of what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives. We soon learn that Francine is pregnant with Stephen's child. Peter, in a moment of despair, offers to help her end her unborn child's life. After all, things look grim for them and for the world. But instead, they change gears. They establish a safe space within the mall and begin cooking up a plan to take the whole place back from the undead wanderers. For a while, it's like they're living in a video game. Until Roger gets bitten by a zombie and begins to die, a process that will lead to his becoming a zombie too. When he passes, Peter has to finish him off. But then the 3 remaining survivors settle into a new life of unlimited consumption. The zombies are unable to get to them, and they help themselves to all the finest food, clothes, and other amenities available to them, many of which they could never have afforded before the catastrophe. Roger declares, one-stop shopping, everything you need right at your fingertips. But he's wrong. As Jesus says when he is tempted by Satan in the wilderness, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. Before long, Stephen, Fran, and Peter are bored and more frightened than before. There are no more radio or TV broadcasts. Fran's child grows within her more and more each day, and they all know that what they are experiencing can't last. In short time, they become the zombies, the living dead, reminding us of how spiritually stunted we are when we try to close ourselves off in enjoyment of material comforts. Suddenly, the idyllic world they have created by pushing the zombies out of the mall is invaded by a brutal gang of fellow humans, wild bikers who want to smash and destroy in rebellion against a select few who have hoarded vast quantities of goods for themselves. Now the war is once again between living, breathing creatures with souls and wills and love. There are many casualties, including Stephen, who instead of fleeing safely, foolishly fires his rifle at the bikers in anger for their incursion into their sacred space. In the end, Peter and Fran alone are left, narrowly escaping the groping hands of a horde of zombies to fly off into the unknown, with the promise of new life, but not much fuel in the chopper's tank. As they ascend, the light of the dawn shatters the darkness of night, as it always does, but the ravaged consumption of death remains below. John Carpenter's campy classic, They Live, starring the late professional wrestler Rowdy Roddy Piper, shines a light on a different kind of consumerism, mass media and advertising. Piper plays a drifter with no known identity. He goes by the name John Nada, an everyman, and nobody in particular. Nada arrives in Los Angeles and encounters a blind street preacher who shouts, "Outside the limit of our sight, feeding off us, perched on top of us, from birth to death, are our owners. Our owners. They have us. They control us. They are our masters. Wake up. They're all about you, all around you." Naturally, Nada dismisses the man as a crackpot. Nada then finds a job working construction, where he meets Frank, played by Keith David, who has wandered west after losing his job and leaving his family behind in Detroit. Frank represents the human cost of a system that produces and consumes without an eye to the common good. He says of his former life, "The steel mills were laying people off left and right. They finally went under. We gave the steel companies a break when they needed it. You know what they gave themselves? Raises." Frank shows Nada a place to stay in a shanty town alongside other downtrodden people trying to find their footing amid many worldly difficulties. His first night in the shanty town, Nada watches a television show with his fellow homeless people. An activist hacker hijacks the broadcast, and he articulates the same paranoid vision as the blind street preacher. The world isn't what we think it is. Nada follows Gilbert, the leader of the shantytown, to a meeting in a church, where the street preacher and the TV hacker are present. He then discovers a pair of sunglasses that changes everything. When he puts them on, he sees subliminal messages everywhere. Obey, consume, produce. And more importantly, he sees through the disguises of many of the ordinary-looking people living in his midst. They are aliens with scary skull heads, and they are playing a long con on humanity. We think we're free, but our working and buying, our politics and our entertainment is all shown to play right into the hands of our enslaving extraterrestrial overlords. Nada, a true wild man, goes on a rampage. In the most quotable scene in the film, he enters a bank with a shotgun in his hand and his special glasses on his face. Before opening fire on the aliens, he declares in true WWE promo style, "I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum." Nada tries to convince Frank of what he has discovered about the nature of reality, but Frank won't have it. Nada pleads with him to try the glasses on and see for himself. Frank repeatedly refuses, setting Nada into a rage that opens up a hilarious 6-minute fight scene, which, I can assure you, when you watch the movie, you will never, ever forget. Frank finally relents, puts on the glasses, and accepts the truth. An example of how even those with the most to lose from a consumerist society are hard-pressed to believe there is a better way. Nada and Frank eventually find and destroy the transmitter that keeps the world over blind to the truth of their alien oppressors' presence and designs. But Nada dies in the endeavor, giving the bad guys a throbbing middle finger as he departs this life. John Carpenter has described his cult classic as being about yuppies and unrestrained capitalism. It is also a critique of the uses of technology in a free market. The aliens use the tools of bringing people together to keep them angry, fragmented, and docile. As Pope Francis says in his encyclical letter Fratelli Tutti, this illusion, unmindful of the great fraternal values, leads to a sort of cynicism. For that is the temptation we face if we go down the road of disenchantment and disappointment. Isolation and withdrawal into one's own interests are never the way to restore hope and bring about renewal. Only Lovers Left Alive, written and directed by Jim Jarmusch and starring Tom Hiddleston and Tilda Swinton, approaches consumption in a slightly different way than Dawn of the Dead or They Live. Hiddleston and Swinton play ancient vampires named Adam and Eve living in the 21st century. Like all vampires of lore, they are demonic creatures in the bodies of humans, and they require the blood of animals, and best of all, human animals, to survive and thrive. But Only Lovers Left Alive is a far cry from your typical vampire gore fest. Adam and Eve strive mightily to overcome their urges and to find humane, non-violent ways to feed. Although they live in the shadows and in relative isolation, they try to play their part in making the world a better place. Most of all, they try really, really hard not to consume. Adam lives in a desolate neighborhood in a rundown city. He lives off the power grid with a renewable energy system that he has invented. He buys rare vintage guitars, amplifiers, and effects pedals, and he spends his waking hours composing and recording music that no one will ever hear. Eve lives across the world from Adam, but depressed about the current state of humanity and the world, they decide to reunite after many years apart. Their love for each other is the only thing that makes sense, and it's getting harder and harder for them to avoid playing the same violent and selfish game that they see playing out among them in the lives of ordinary humans. Adam laments, "I just feel like the sand is at the bottom of the hourglass or something." After various explorations, Adam and Eve are together and starving in Morocco. Finally, they just can't help themselves. They consume. The audience comes away remembering that no matter how hard we try to be responsible, to recycle, to reuse, to eat ethically sourced foods and make ethically informed decisions in our retail purchases, sometimes it's just too hard. The fallen world conspires against us at every turn. We do not despair. Dawn of the Dead, They Live, and Only Lovers Left Alive should not make us wallow in the sin of man, but give thanks for the grace of God. Again, we hear from Pope Francis, we can once more broaden our vision. An authentic humanity, calling for a new synthesis, seems to dwell in the midst of our culture, almost unnoticed, like a mist seeping gently beneath a closed door. We're more than consumers, and we need to remember that we are. The world doesn't have to be a consumerist pit, and in the fullness of time, it won't be.